Welcome to Budget Beauty, where I help you look flawless for less. Welcome back, and a very special welcome if you're new here. My name is Jen, and this is Budget Beauty. We do everything beauty on a budget, and that includes declutters. I have a huge, and I mean huge, makeup, skincare collection. So once a year, I like to declutter everything. Eyeshadow palettes, face palettes, bronzers, blushes, lip products, you name it, we're gonna declutter everything. I have baskets full, I have a cart full of eyeshadow palettes that I'll be decluttering. So if you're excited, give this video a big, huge thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed and your bell is turned on because I upload lots and lots of new videos every single week. Down in the description box, I will link everything I'm decluttering. More to come on that, as well as my favorite beauty subscription boxes, all of the makeup that I'm wearing in today's video if you would like to recreate this look. And come on over, follow me on TikTok for a little bit more beauty on a budget. So let's jump into this massive declutter. So as promised, let me explain to you how my declutters work. I mentioned that I am decluttering everything. Lots of eyeshadow palettes, some face palettes, lip products, blushes, highlighters, a wide variety of things. And I know that some of the palettes and the products that I'm decluttering would be things that you would love to have in your collection. So I'm going to be selling the majority of what I'm decluttering. Everything has been cleaned and sanitized before selling. Here's how purchasing the products that I'm decluttering is going to work. I will be listing them all down in the description box with prices. The more you buy, the more you save. You can even get free shipping with a certain number of item purchases. Every single purchase will include free gifts, which are some of the lip products and things that I'm decluttering that I'm just not planning on selling. A lot of the products have never been used before, and like I mentioned, everything else has been cleaned and sanitized. It is first come, first serve. As the products sell, I will be marking them as sold down in the description box. So if there's anything that I'm decluttering that you want, you need to grab it quickly. You'll be able to pay with PayPal or Venmo. All of that information will also be down in the description box. So again, run, don't walk if you want any of these items because they always sell out super quickly. So this whole basket here are giveaway items. There's everything from lip products, highlighters, there's even multi-chrome flakes from Danessa Myricks, there's liquid blushes, cream blushes. I mean, this is packed with products. Most of the bullet lipsticks I've never used before. I actually ended up decluttering all of my bullet lipsticks because I do not reach for them. I am very much a liquid lip oil, lip gloss girl. So for me, I'm never going to use the bullet lips. So I decided to pass them on to a better home. So the items in here will be free with purchase. I'll be throwing a couple of freebies in with every purchase. And then this basket has some face palettes, some highlighters, some blushes, things that I will be selling. So let's go through everything in here. All of these items, like I said, will be down in the description box and are available for purchase. So the first thing I have is from the brand Bella Pierre. This is an indie brand. This is a pretty expensive indie brand, and this is their 12 color pro lip palette. This is brand new, never been swatched, never been used. It is 12 lip colors and it includes a brush. So everything from more neutral lips, pinky lips, red, there's even some fun purples in here. There is a mirror in the palette, and like I said, this is brand new, never been touched. Next up is a blush palette from the indie brand Okalon. The plastic is still on here, never been touched, never been used. There is a mirror in this palette as well. So you have a peach blush, a pink blush, and then a little bit lighter pink blush, brand new. I have several blush palettes from Lunar Beauty, Jaclyn Cosmetics that I reach for all the time that I didn't want to use this, knowing that I probably would only use it once or twice. So I'd rather it go to someone who will get a lot of use out of it. These are fantastic for travel or if you have a limited amount of beauty space. Speaking of face palettes, I am going to be decluttering my Jaclyn Hill Duo. This is actually a really pretty glowy blush and a bronzer. It is in Hot Lava and Cocoa Rich. This packaging is really nice. I've used this quite a few times. I just don't find myself reaching for it. I honestly struggle with getting a lot of use out of face palettes unless I'm traveling. I much prefer just a solid blush palette, solid highlighter palette, solid bronzer palette over the types of palettes like this that have both a blush and a bronzer. So this would be a nice addition to a collection. Speaking of highlight palettes, I am going to be decluttering my glowing palette from Okalon. Again, that is that indie company. These highlighters, they're beautiful. Now I haven't used all of the shades in here, but I've used this really pretty icy white, this gold you can see I've used the champagne one. I just have highlighter palettes and single highlighters that I just tend to reach for more. And I just don't want any of these things just sitting in my collection being unused. And one more face palette. I actually have never used this either. This is from Coasmetics. This is a beautiful, beautiful palette. So there is a mix of highlighters, bronzers. There's these multi-colored sections that have all the products: bronzer, contour, highlighter, and blush all in one. There is the famous Rodeo Drive highlighter, which is absolutely beautiful. I actually have a single of that. I'm just not, again, I just don't reach for these multi-level face palettes. This palette is about $140. I don't even know if it's still available on Ofra's website. It's the On the Glow palette. It's just a great way to get a lot of products in one palette. I have two single blushes from Hourglass. This is the shade Incandescent Electra. This is beautiful. It is more of a glowy blush, and we know how expensive Hourglass is. I don't reach for this because I love highlighter, and this kind of gives me blush and highlighter in one. I like to have those a little bit separate, so I just don't reach for these. This one, I don't know that I've ever used it. I think it's only been swatched. And then this one is in Diffused Heat. Now this one I have used a couple times. This one is really beautiful. More of a goldy champagne highlight with that really pretty pink blush. So both Hourglass blushes are available. Also from Benefit, I have my Georgia Peach blush. Smells amazing. This is a really pretty blush. It's just a little bit too light for my skin tone. I have to apply a lot of it to get any color, and it is a little bit more of a glowy blush. And like I said, I prefer more of a matte blush, and then I can layer highlighter on top, but Benefit does make some really great blushes. And the last blush is the most popular blush from NARS. This is the Orgasm blush. And again, the reason I'm decluttering this, number one, I don't reach for it. Number two, it is a little bit more of a glowy blush, but this is a beautiful blush. It's a pinky peach glowy blush. And then I have two highlighters. The first one is from Tower 28. This is the Run Coast highlight. This is a cream highlighter. It is beautiful. Not gonna lie, it is a beautiful, beautiful highlighter. I love Tower 28 products. I'm actually wearing one of their cream blushes today. I just don't use cream highlighters. Every time I've gotten one or purchased one, I never use it. I've actually never used this. I've only swatched this. So this, but if you love cream products, as we age, cream products are really good. And this is just a beautiful, glowy highlighter. You can layer this under powder and still see that glow. And the last highlighter is actually from Lunar Beauty. Now, I love Lunar Beauty. It is an indie brand, Manny MUA here on YouTube's brand. And this is the Jupiter highlighter. This is too dark for my skin tone. It is more of a glowy blush for me. If you love glowy blush, you could use this as a highlight blush combo. But like I mentioned, I prefer more of a matte blush glowy highlight. I have used this a couple of times. It is really beautiful. If your skin tone is any deeper than mine, this would be absolutely stunning as a highlighter. My skin tone are lighter. Again, you can use this as a glowy blush. Now let's jump into eyeshadow palettes. I literally have stacks of eyeshadow palettes over here. Let me see if I can roll it closer. Oh, you can't really see them, but I have stacks of them. Some of these palettes I've never used, but like I said, everything has been 100% cleaned and sanitized. So the first palette actually comes from the indie brand Molly Beauty, and this is the Best Dressed Lids. I have never used this palette. I've never even swatched this palette. So it is brand new. It is very much a neutral palette. If you didn't know, I'm a color lover. Now, I love a good neutral look. I have a neutral look on today, but I much prefer color. So this is very much a neutral palette, but it's really pretty. It's neutral with a little bit of a twist. You can see there's a blue, there's a purple, there's even some of these kind of rosy mauve shades. It looks absolutely beautiful, but again, it is just, it's a neutral palette. I know I'm not going to reach for because the neutral palettes I do use, they're my all-time favorite in my collection. And again, this one, brand new. Next up may come as a bit of a surprise, but this is the Natasha Denona Zendo palette. Now this palette is really, really beautiful. It is definitely a neutral palette. I love the blues, greens, and teals on the side right here. It's just not a palette I reach for. It's a neutral palette that just sits and sits in my collection. I have two. One of them is brand new. The one that is brand new and the used one will both be for sale down in the description box. If you've wanted to get your hands on Natasha Denona, this is going to be the most affordable way to do that. The formula is okay in here. It's not my favorite formula. And honestly, it's a neutral palette that just sits around. And I would rather it get lots of use from one of you. And then I'm going to declutter my Jaclyn Volume 2 palette. Now I have the Volume 1 palette as well. I actually love that palette and use it all the time. Here is what the Volume 2 looks like. It's a beautiful palette. The formula in here is really, really nice. You have a lot of neutrals. You have the fun berry tones. I love, like I said, the formula of this palette, but when I'm thinking of either a berry tone or a neutral look, I'm just not reaching for this one. For me, I reach for my Volume 1 even more. Now, I've used this just a couple of times. So it is very, very lightly used, and again, would be just a great addition for a big, full of color, full of neutral shade palette. Next is my Juvia's Place I Live, I Love. I actually think this is such a unique, fun color story. I have used this a handful of times. I've created some beautiful looks with it. The shimmers in here are so pretty. This red shimmer, beautiful, and you wouldn't think to pair the blue and the red together, but you truly can create some really, really pretty looks. I just don't reach for this palette. I don't know why. Like I said, the looks I've created were really beautiful. My palette shelf is overflowing, so I really had to think long and hard about the palettes I was keeping, and this one just happened to fall in the declutter list. Next up is my Laura Lee Los Angeles Nudie Patootie palette. Now this one I recently just did an eye look with it, and actually really, really enjoy this palette. The formula in here is really well. It's really nice. It's very neutral. It's very nude. It does have a couple of pops of pink, and actually this shimmer right here is really, really beautiful. But I have the Nudie Patootie 2, the smaller palette, and I thought long and hard about it, and I feel like I would reach for that palette more than this one. But like I said, the look I just did with this was really, really beautiful. Very neutral, very nude, as Laura Lee Los Angeles' brand is. But overall, this is a very beautiful palette. Next is a little quad from Bella Pierre. Again, this is an indie brand. This is the Purple Haze quad. I did use this little quad once, and I did really like my look, but I have these colors in my collection time and time again. And like I said, it was like a cutthroat declutter. If it wasn't something I was gonna see myself using over 6, 7, 8 times next year, it's in today's declutter, and I just don't see myself reaching for this one. Now this one was a hard decision. This is the ColourPop in the Springs palette. I have only used this palette once, and I really enjoyed the look that I created with this palette. I think the color story is very, very unique. I love that it's oranges, it's blues. You've got some nice deep shades down here for deepening up your look. And like I said, the look I created with this was really, really beautiful. I don't know why I'm decluttering it. I don't see myself grabbing it. I don't know why, because again, the formula, the color story, it's very unique. I have all of these colors. I think it's very much leaning a neutral palette with just this few little colorful shades right here, and that's probably why it's just not one that I'm reaching for. I don't think this is available anymore on the ColourPop website though, so here's your chance to get it. Next up is the Cobra Kai palette from Play Cosmetics. Now this one I have never ever used. I have only swatched this palette. Now I think it's a pretty story. Again, I think it's a pretty color story. Again, very, very neutral. Again, not another neutral palette that I'm gonna reach for since I am not the biggest neutral lover to begin with. I will say though that this kind of gray shade in the corner swatched beautifully. The packaging is a little bit cumbersome. It's kind of big and chunky, but if you love Cobra Kai or you want a really good kind of smaller neutral palette, this would be a great one. Another neutral palette from Elamon Cosmetics, an indie brand. This is the True Nude palette. This one I also have only swatched, never applied to my eyes. It is a very, very neutral palette. I will give it props for having light to deep and mid-tone shades so you can create a really, really pretty eye look. I remember this shimmer. This is the only shimmer in the palette. It's swatched so pretty. Would be a beautiful eyebrow highlight, inner corner highlight. Really, really pretty palette. Just again, not one I'm gonna reach for. We have the Mother Nature palette from Cass Cosmetics. Now I have used this palette and it's beautiful. I'm not gonna lie, it is a beautiful palette. The formula is really, really nice in this palette. I love how unique the color story is. This blue shade, I have not used it. I've only swatched it and it swatches beautifully. The shimmers in this palette are really, really nice. I just have this same type of color story time and time again in my collection. And this just being a smaller palette, it's just not one that I would pick over maybe my larger palettes. Here's another one that was a hard decision. This is the Nabla Cutie palette in Midnight. This is such a fun palette. This shade right here, gorgeous, like absolutely stunningly gorgeous. I love that there is a neutral shade and then lots of blue shades. If you love blue shadow or you want to get into blue shadow, this is a great palette because you can make a more neutral blue look. This deep navy color, absolutely beautiful. I have the BH Cosmetics Sweet Shop Blue palette, and if I want to do a blue look, that's always the one I'm picking. So that's why I decided to finally go ahead and declutter the Nabla palette. I do have a couple little 5-pan ColourPop palettes. The first one is the Crush. This is actually a really pretty palette, neutral with a little bit of an orange vibe to it. This one is just a color story I have in my collection a million times, so I never reach for that. And then this one I debated on, but it's been a long time since I've used it. And honestly, I think I've only used it once. And this is the High Society palette. I don't think either one of these are available on the ColourPop website anymore. The shimmer shade down here came broken, so I have repressed it into the palette. But this is just a really pretty green monochromatic 5-pan palette. You actually can create really easy, quick looks with both of these. Here's another palette I really liked. I was quite impressed with the formula of this. This is the e.l.f. Game Up palette. It was nice to see e.l.f. come out with a more colorful palette. And like I said, the formula in here is really good. This whole collection was really good. I love the setting spray. I still use the lip gloss from this collection all the time. You have 5 shimmers, 5 mattes. You can create monochromatic looks, colorful looks. I love that there's oranges and greens for a little bit more neutral. And this, again, I think is another one that may not be available, or you may only be able to get this on the e.l.f. website. One more little small palette. This is from Lawless. This is the Baby One palette. Now, I have never used this palette. I have only swatched this palette. It is definitely a more berry toned mauve leaning palette. There are the 2 shimmers, which are the neutral shimmers, which is great because they'll go with all the mattes in the palette. This red color right here is a really pretty berry color, but I have the Jaclyn Hill Strawberry Feels palette that has these same colors in it, and that one I really enjoy. So Lawless unfortunately didn't make the cut. Here's another one I thought long and hard about. This is the ABH, or the Anastasia Beverly Hills Amrezy palette. The quality of this is so good. This blue shimmer here, this pink shimmer here, I just never reach for this. I couldn't tell you why. I reach for my Huda Mercury Retrograde and my Huda Rose Quartz palette that kind of has the same vibe to it more than I reach for this one. I've actually only used this palette a couple of times. It even has the brush still in the plastic. It is a beautiful neutral palette, and again, the formula is really nice. And then from LA Girl, this is the Holly Days palette. This has been discontinued. It was actually their holiday palette a couple of years ago. It is beautiful. It is so beautiful with those rich greens, those neutral browns, the blues. I have never applied this to my eyes. I've only swatched this. I have the Temptalia collection from Sydney Grace, which is literally these same colors, and that's the one I'm picking. I'm very into indie makeup, independently owned makeup. I think the quality is so good with those that if I have an indie palette that resembles a mainstream palette, I'm always choosing the indie. So this one has never gotten any love, but it is such a beautiful palette. It definitely needs to be used. I also really enjoyed this palette from Persona. This is the Identity 2 palette. Now, I have used this one a couple of times. It is a neutral palette again, which is a couple of pops of color. The formula in this is really nice. I love the packaging. The packaging is a plastic, hard packaging. It feels very luxe. This gray kind of leaning blue shimmer is so beautiful. Really easy to create neutral looks with a little bit of a twist. From Ruby May Cosmetics, this one was a hard one too. I've honestly never used this palette. It has only been swatched, and it is so pretty. It is absolutely beautiful green, blue, purple palette. I love that it's a 6-pan palette because it makes it easy to store, easy for travel. The 2 shimmers in here are so beautiful. But again, if I'm reaching for blue, it's my BH Cosmetics palette every single time, or I'm going back into those Sydney Grace Temptalia palettes. Now, before we move on, quick question for you guys. Would you be interested in seeing my eyeshadow palette collection, where I share with you everything that's in my collection? I can break it down by brand. Let me know if you're interested in an eyeshadow palette collection video. I know I have well over 300 before this declutter, so it would be a very extensive video, but if you're interested, let me know. From Essence, I have the Coral Me Maybe palette. Now, this one I've used several times. I've actually featured this in a drugstore makeup palette. The quality, a drugstore makeup video, the quality is really good. Really, really good. We have light, mid-tone, deep mattes. We have 3 different shimmers, so it's an equal matte shimmer palette. I've used it several times, but it's been a long time. So I decided that it needed a new home. Now I have another palette from LA Girl. This is the Hey Hey Vacay palette, and this one is actually the Good Times and Tan Lines. This is so pretty. And again, such good quality. LA Girl makes some really, really amazing palettes. This one, again, is a neutral palette with a twist. We've got some oranges. We've got these nice teal green shades. You can actually create looks by rows, so it makes it really easy to put together a look. I have the other Hey Hey Vacay palette from them that has the green cover, and I decided that that was the one I was going to keep. I didn't need both, and I figured that the one with the green cover was the one I would probably reach for a little bit more often. Now this one from She Glam was our Halloween palette release last year, so it is no longer available. This is the Wretched Romance palette. This is really nice quality. Really, really nice from She Glam. Now, She Glam is Shein's makeup line, Shein, the fast fashion company. The formula of this was fantastic. I created some beautiful, beautiful looks with this last Halloween, but I haven't reached for it since. It's just been sitting in my collection. And again, I'm really trying to curate my collection and only keep the palettes that I know that I will use time and time again. And the fact that I haven't reached for this in a long time lets me know again that it needs to go to someone who will get lots of use out of it. And then we have this huge beast of a palette from Glamlight. This is the Glamlight paint palette. I actually have never used this. It is brand new, never been swatched, never been used. It still has the brush in plastic. I mean, it even still has the paper covering. And here's what the palette looks like. So here again is what the palette looks like. This shade came a little bit dented in, but like I said, I've never used this palette. I've never swatched this palette. I have so many rainbow palettes, and the fact that this has just sat here unused, and Glamlight makes such an incredible formula, it was one of the first ones I grabbed for the declutter. Next up is the Ciate London Spice palette. Now I've used this palette one time and I did enjoy it. I created a really pretty look. It's very similar to the palette that I have on my eyes today. And again, it's just one of those color stories I have time and time again. And I just picked my favorites, the ones that I knew I'd grab, and this one didn't quite make the cut, but it is a really nice formula. And I will say the packaging is very, very high quality. I have a couple more ColourPop 5-pan palettes. This one is the Rumor Has It palette. I have never used this. I've only swatched this palette. I think the palette is really, really pretty. Again, it's just not one that I gravitate towards or that I find myself reaching for. And then this one I never use. It's from their Neon collection. I don't even think I've ever used it or swatched it. No, I haven't. This is from their Neon collection, but the only neon is this yellow shade in the middle. And it's just, other than that, a very neutral palette. So I'm just not gonna pick it. Again, I don't need any more neutral palettes. I have a lot of neutral palettes. From Catrice, I have this little cute 5 in a box palette. This is really a fun palette. It's their little 5-pan smoky eye palette. It makes a really pretty easy smoky eye look. That's what's great with these 5-pan palettes. It's literally the easiest eye look. Transition, deepening up the crease, outer corner, shimmer shade on the lid, shimmer shade in the inner corner and the brow bone. Really, really easy to create looks. And this one, if you love a good smoky eye without it being a black smoky eye, this one is fantastic. From Rare Beauty, this is the Come to Play palette. Now I've used this palette once and I didn't love my look. I don't love this palette because this big shade is a glitter. It is a pressed kind of chunky glitter, and I don't love pressed glitter. So that's why I decided to declutter this one. And again, very pink, mauve, neutral color story. You saw that time and time again. And Rare Beauty is just not a brand that I love. And so I figured that this one could go to someone who really loves the Rare Beauty brand. Then I have a Viseart palette, and this is my only Viseart palette. Now I have used this one a couple of times, but you're going to see a theme that this is the same kind of neutral color story that I've decided to narrow down my collection using. But the Viseart quality is really nice, and I like how this one folds up and then goes in this little pouch here, so it is so great for travel. Just really protects the palette from getting broken, and like I said, Viseart makes a great quality shadow. I have another little palette from Bella Pierre. This is their Peach Blossom. Now, I've never used this, only swatched this. It kind of reminds me of that one from Essence, this guy right here, the Coral Me Maybe. Very similar color story. This one just has the 4 pans, and this one is a pretty shimmer heavy palette. These 3 are shimmers, and that is your only matte. However, this red kind of berry shimmer, you could use that as a matte, because the shimmers aren't in your face shimmers, so you could actually use that to deepen up the outer corner. So these 2 are just really pretty kind of peach coral palettes. Next up is the Pretty Little Thing palette. This is actually the palette that I have on my eyes today. I just got this in my Pretty Little Thing advent calendar. It performed really nicely, but again, same color story that we've seen time and time again. And I have a Natasha Denona 5-pan palette similar to this that I always use. So I wanted to test this out so I could let you know if it was a good quality. Like I said, it's what's on my eyes today. It is very, very, very nice quality. Everything blended out very nicely. From Alamar Cosmetics, this is the Spanglish palette. Again, we are back with that same neutral pop of pink, pop of purple. This one I've never used. I've only swatched it, but these 2 purple shimmers, the swatches were incredible, like incredible. I almost kept it because those were so beautiful, but this color story I have 50,000 times. Now here's another one I struggled with. This is another ABH palette, or an Anastasia Beverly Hills. This is the original Norvina palette. Now I don't know that this one is even still available anymore, but again, we've got that neutral color story, pop of purple, pop of mauve. The ABH formula though, super nice. It does come with the brush, never been used. I don't think I've ever applied this to my eyes. I think I've only swatched this palette. So it's basically brand new, never really been used. Actually, you know what? I haven't even swatched this. This palette is brand new. Brand new. There's no swatches out of this. So if you've been wanting the original Norvina palette from ABH, here's your chance. From Huda Beauty, I have the Rose Gold Remastered. Now, I actually really like this palette. I've used this palette quite a few times, and the quality formula, really, really nice. Again, it's that same color story that I have multiple times, and I really had to dig deep. I had to dig deep and decide which palettes with these color stories I wanted, because honestly, my shelf is so full, I don't have room for any new palettes, and there's gonna be palettes coming out in 2023 that I wanna get, and I don't wanna buy a second shelf. I refuse to buy a second eyeshadow palette shelf. So that's why you're gonna see some really good quality palettes in today's Declutter. Now, shockingly, I have an Odin's Eye palette. I love Odin's Eye. You'll see if I do my palette collection if you guys want to see that. I have a ton of Odin's Eye products, but this is the Elva eyeshadow palette. This one is brand new, never been used. You can tell why I decluttered it. I mean, let's look at the color story. Very similar to the other ones that I've decluttered. This one I also had to think long and hard about though, because Odin's Eye formula is an indie formula, indie brand from Sweden, and it's so good. I mean, so good. But I figured I've never used this yet since I got it, and a brand new palette could go to one of you guys that will get a ton of use out of it. And if you've never tried Odin's Eye, it's not an inexpensive brand. So this is your chance to try it out, because the quality, so good. Now, speaking of indie brands, and another palette, I almost cried decluttering. It was really hard. I am actually having a little bit of regret right now, but this is the Lunar Beauty Eternal Eclipse palette. And this one, the only reason I chose to declutter it is the color story. Not that I don't like the color story, because I very much like the color story, but again, neutral with a pop of purple, pop of blue. I've used this palette a couple times. Lunar Beauty's formula is amazing, like absolutely amazing. Oh, do I want to get rid of this? I mean, I don't know. Yes, I'm getting rid of it. I'm decluttering it. You are decluttering it, because Lunar Beauty is going to come out with something new that I'm going to want, and my shelf is full. So I'm going to go ahead and declutter this begrudgingly, but I'm going to go ahead and put this down below for you. Now, this is another palette that I hemmed and hawed about. This is from Nomad Cosmetics. They are an indie brand as well. I have every palette they've ever released. This is the only one in this declutter. This is actually the Pornetia Paradise palette. I just call it the Paradise palette. Don't get me wrong. Beautiful palette, absolutely beautiful, perfect summer leaning palette. Very much a pastel palette, but there is some grunge, there's some deep tones, there's a deep green, there's a deep blue. But when I was thinking about my more mid-toned palettes, there's not really a lot of deep shades in here, and I love a deep shade for my outer corner. I always deepen up my outer corner, and that's where I struggled with this palette, is it was more light mid-tone, and so I was feeling like I had to bring in another palette, and for me, that just doesn't work for me when I have a full eyeshadow palette shelf. So I decided to go ahead and pass my Nomad Paradise palette on. Again, I don't know if this is available anymore. It is a beautiful, beautiful color story, and Nomad has a great formula as well. Now this one may come as a bit of a surprise because this seems to be quite a favorite for a lot of people. This is the Limoncello palette from ColourPop. I don't think this palette is available anymore. It is one that everybody just rants, that everybody just raves about this, saying the quality is so good. And the quality in this palette is really good. I just never use it. Never. I like this blue. Every time I've used this palette, I've put the blue in somewhere. I like that there's some pretty yellows. There's a lot of neutrals. This kind of shifty yellow-green shimmer is beautiful, but going through my ColourPop collection and just whittling it down to just my favorite palettes, this one didn't quite make the cut. This may come as a bit of a shock too. This is the Melt Cosmetics Millennial Pink palette. Now, I only own a couple of Melt palettes. Their formula for me is pretty hit and miss. The formula in this one is pretty good. This is a very pink palette, but what's fun about it is you have these couple deep shades right here. And like I mentioned, I like to deepen up my outer corner. So for me, I was like, oh, that's perfect. I can go with a lighter pinky look and then really deepen it up with these two shades down here. But I never used this palette. I think I've used it once. Loved my look. I think the formula in this one is really, really good. But again, we're being hardcore. We're being hardcore in this declutter. I just found another face palette, actually brand new, untouched. This is from Cab Cosmetics. This is their contour palette. I have this already, so this is a duplicate for me. I actually have two of them. This is the Volume 1 palette, which is for light to medium skin tone. So it's all powders and contour shades. Again, you've got a nice banana powder for under the eyes. You're contouring, you're bronzing. This translucent powder is a really pretty formula, but this is a duplicate for me. And this is a very expensive contour palette. And since I already own one, I thought that a brand new one could go to one of you. Another Glam Light palette. This is another one that was really hard for me. This is the Glam Light Burger palette. I've never used it. Oh my gosh, I feel so horrible saying that because Glam Light's formula is so nice, but I've never ever used this palette. I think the packaging is so fun. I love that they have the whole food theme. But again, after looking at it, I'm like, I have all these colors elsewhere. We don't need to keep a palette we've never used. And being brand new, I know that one of you will not only love it for the packaging, but get a really good quality, pretty color story. IBY is another indie brand I really love, and this is their Sunday Brunch palette. This one also has never been used. And when I pulled it out, I'm like, yes, I'm keeping that one because I love IBY. Their quality is really, really nice. And then I was like, you don't need it. You've never used it. It's untouched and someone will love every second of this palette. It is neutral, but the greens in here are so beautiful. This blue, it is just a really, really fun store. It's a really fun color story in a palette. And like I said, IBY is such a great brand. Then from Alter Ego, I have the Shadow Kiss palette. Now, Alter Ego dupes high-end palette. So this is actually a dupe for the Natasha Denona Glam palette. This is her very cool toned, smoky eye palette dupe from Alter Ego. I've used this once. The quality was okay. It's definitely not Natasha Denona quality, but it's also not Natasha Denona price, but I'm not gonna reach for this. There's a couple of cool tone palettes I really enjoy. I definitely lean more towards warm tones, so I had to make some hard decisions, and this one from Alter Ego didn't quite make the cut. Now this little Cella palette is really, really nice. I've used this palette several times. I think it's so pretty with the neutrals, with the pops of blue. We have everything from light shades, we have deep dark shades, the shimmers in this palette. Really, really nice. I've used this a handful of times, but it's been a hot minute since I have. And when I was thinking about it, I was really trying to think about how often am I reaching for them, or when I see them on my eyeshadow palette shelf, am I like, ooh, I can't wait to use that. And I just didn't feel that with this one anymore. So I decided that it would end up in the declutter. From Wander Beauty, this is the Wanderous Escape palette. Now this one I've used a couple of times as well. And I do really like this palette, but again, that same neutral with a pop of pink, pop of a fun kind of shimmer color, which by the way, this shimmer is so pretty. It's like ocean water. It is so, so beautiful. And that shimmer alone, I almost kept this palette. And then I stopped myself. And said, look at all the colors. The other colors in there are the ones that you have multiples of. So Wander Beauty does make some really nice palettes. And I don't think this one's available anymore. Speaking of Wander Beauty, this is the Wanderous Rush palette. This one I've used even more than the other palette. Same kind of color story though. Those mauves with the deep colors, a couple of shimmer shades. This one is really pretty. It's definitely a smaller palette. So this is the one I would generally take for travel just because it's a 6-pan neutral palette. We have the Hidden Garden palette from Estate Cosmetics. Now this one I only swatched. I've actually never applied it to my eyes because once I saw it and swatched it, I just knew color story wise, I wasn't going to be gravitating towards this one. Too neutral for me. I think the purple is really pretty and a nice addition. Same with the green, but I mean, let's talk about how this looks like all the other palettes in today's video. And another Glam Light. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get so much hate for this. I'm gonna get canceled for this. I will say I kept the Glam Light Cake palette though because I love that palette. This is the Taco palette. This one I have used and I can attest at how amazing the formula is, how amazing the quality is. Mattes are buttery soft, shimmers are beautiful. Same color story though, that I have time and time again. I haven't reached for this since we moved to Arizona, so I knew that because of that, it didn't need to just sit around. And if you have not tried Glam Light or you've wanted this palette for a while, these may not even be available anymore. This is your chance to try out just one of the best indie brands. My Tarte little Glamazon palette. And as soon as I show it to you, you'll know why it's here. Again, that same neutral with the pop of pink. I will say though that this formula in this palette is really, really nice for Tarte. I'm not a big Tarte lover, but the formula in this one is great and it makes an easy eye look. It's a simple 6-pan palette. Then I have the Huda Beauty Coral Obsessions palette. So here's what that looks like, her little coral 9-pan palette. I'm looking at this and I've only swatched this. I've never used this and I've had this palette for a while. So that alone was why it ended up in the Declutter. I do think the color story is beautiful. And like I said, Huda Beauty hit and miss on the formula. So I can't really attest to this, but I did keep a few of her other 9-pan palettes in my collection. So if that tells you something. I have another ABH palette. This is the Norvina Mini Pro palette. This one came with the green shimmer Shattered. I did press it into place, but I've never used this palette. I think the color story is gorgeous. It's very, very unique. I love the greens, the oranges, this really bright, like pinky purple. But again, it's been just sitting, not getting any use. One more Huda Beauty palette. This is the Topaz Obsessions. This one I have used actually, and the quality of this one is really nice, but it's just a warm tone neutral palette. And I have several smaller warm tone neutrals and some bigger warm tone neutrals. This actually reminds me a little bit of the Natasha Denona Zendo, and it's just a smaller version of that. And if I don't reach for that one, I'm probably not going to do a lot of reaching for this one. Now this one I've used quite a few times and really enjoyed it. This is from the brand Fluid. It's an indie brand. This is the Otherworldly palette. Yes, she's a neutral palette, but look at the spin. We've got this green. This purple is such a pretty shimmer. And I love that they just added a little bit of spice to the palette by adding in these really kind of fun shimmer shades with the more neutral mattes. And like I said, I've used this several times, loved all my looks with it, but it's been a while since I reached for it. Oh my God, we're at the end. This is a lot of palettes. It's a lot of palettes I'm decluttering, but we are done. This is the final one. This is from OPV Beauty, which is an indie brand. This is the Spotlight palette. This is a stunning, absolutely stunning palette. It's been in my collection for a little bit now and I have only swatched it. I've never actually applied this to my eyes, but I love the color story of this. This is another one that I took back off my shelf, put back on my shelf, took off, put back on, and finally decided just stop it. If you decluttered the Lunar Beauty one, oh, it's in my pile here that had this same kind of color story, you've got these colors elsewhere. So give this one to a good home because it's really nice quality. Holy moly. That was a lot of palettes. We made it through my eyeshadow palette, face palette, makeup declutter for the year. Again, let me know down below if you'd like to see an eyeshadow palette collection video where I show you all of my palettes. I can break them up by brand, talk about the ones I love. I can give you all the information and show you my entire eyeshadow palette collection. Don't forget, everything is linked down below for you to purchase. That basket of all those products will be goodies that will be thrown in with all the different orders. You can pay with PayPal or Venmo, but go quick because whenever I sell my palettes, they go very, very quickly. So again, everything will be down below for you. I'll keep up with marking them as sold as they sell. And if you enjoyed the declutter, give it a big thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not, because I upload lots and lots of new videos every single week. And don't forget, along with all the makeup I shared with you today, I'll have my favorite beauty boxes, the makeup I'm wearing today, and TikTok down below for you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you give all of these amazing makeup products a new home and get lots of use out of them. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.